We're pleased to welcome Mark Greaney to the Savannah Book Festival and Savannah Technical College. Mark is here today through the SBF at Schools program, which was designed to bring nationally recognized and prize-winning authors to Savannah area students to share their love of the written word. Mark Greaney's research for the Gray Man novels, including Chaos Agent, Burner, Sierra 6, Ballistic, On Target, The Gray Man, Relentless, 1 Minute Out, Mission Critical, Agent in Place, Gunmetal Gray, Black Blast, Dead Eye. Is there any others?
You lost me about 5 minutes.
Has taken him to more than 35 countries. Is it still 35?
Yeah, it's like 39.
39 countries, we'll go with that. And he is trained alongside military and law enforcement in the use of firearms, battlefield medicine, close-range combat tactics. With Marine Lieutenant Colonel Rip Rawlings, he wrote the New York Times bestseller, Red Metal. And I believe you're collaborating on a second book, are you
Correct.
not?
Yeah.
Okay. And let's see, collaborating with Tom Clancy, he co-authored Looked On, Threat Vector, and Command Authority, Tom Clancy's last 3 books. He's also the author of the New York Times bestsellers, Tom Clancy Support and Defend, Tom Clancy Full Force and Effect, Tom Clancy Commander-in-Chief, and Tom Clancy True Faith and Allegiance, all written since the 2013 passing of the author. Please join me in welcoming Mark Greaney.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. This is wonderful.
Great to be here.
My students in particular are interested in the evolution of the books to the screen, of course, because these are film students. So let's start there. What was your initial reaction when you learned Gray Man was being optioned for the screen, and how did that take place?
Well, so it happened in many, many stages. So I had a lot of reactions over the years. But so when my first book was, when a publisher in New York said, I will publish your first book, it was just a mass market paperback. It wasn't a hardcover like I have now. A mass market is the airplane books, you know, the small paperbacks. And that was my entree into the industry. And I was obviously thrilled because I'd been trying to be published for a couple of decades of writing, and so I was very, very happy, but it was not any big thing that was coming out. And I got the book deal in 2008, and the book was coming out in, I think, October of 2009. And around the spring of 2009, I was talking to my agent and up in New York, and he was saying that there was some film interest, which I just kind of rolled my eyes a little bit because you hear a lot of things and things never really, mature, or they never really come off like that. And then a couple months later, we actually got an offer from a small studio or a producer for something. And I was so happy, not because I thought they were going to make a movie, not because I thought I was going to get rich, but because I thought I'm going to go out with my first little paperback and I can go, it's sold to Hollywood. So I didn't care what they offered. And at that point, I had a film agent who was representing me, and he's like, "Let's not take this one. I think we can do a lot better." And I was like, "Are you crazy?" It's like all I want is just the cachet of saying that this possibly could happen. But I did what he said, and then we ended up getting a much nicer offer from a bigger studio
with a lot more money involved.
With more money, and that was right before the book came out. So it was really beneficial for me. I had no book tour. The publisher, if you're writing a mass market book, which I don't even really think they publish people straight to mass market anymore, they're not going to send you on a book tour or whatever. So I arranged a couple of little events in my town, and it was nice to be able to get up in front of people and say that this had been picked up by Hollywood. But I really thought that was it. So I was thrilled, but I also had very low expectations. And for the first year or so, that's about where that stood. But then I started, the New Regency was the studio that picked it up at that point. And they hired a screenwriter who was very, very good. And he actually talked to me and collaborated with me, and we spent a lot of time talking. And he wrote that first screenplay, and it was picked up on the Blacklist, which is the annual list of the sort of industry people vote on the best unproduced screenplays in Hollywood. And so Gray Man was on it. So that got a lot of attention. Pretty soon there was another draft, and Brad Pitt was attached to it, and things looked really good. And this was 2012, I would guess. And then everything fell apart. I remember at one point the screenwriter saying, this is as close to a done deal as you get in Hollywood. You never have a done deal. he said basically like the only thing, maybe if the head of the studio left or something like that, that could hurt it. And then the head of the studio left. So even when that happened,
Welcome to Hollywood.
Yeah, even when that happened, he's like, yeah, but Brad Pitt's attached. I think we're fine. We were not fine. So the rights came back to me eventually. And as soon as the rights came back to me, they had me on phone calls with a lot of different studios and producers and even some actors representatives who wanted it. So a lot of people knew about it. And it wasn't even attached to that screenplay anymore. It was just back to my book that was going to be optioned. And so we talked to a bunch of people, and I decided on the Russo brothers. I had a really great call with them. They certainly seemed to, I remember getting off the phone and calling a buddy of mine, and I'm like, yeah, they like that book more than I do, which is a good thing. And then that was 2014 or 15. And so we signed with them and with Sony at the time. I'm giving you a really long answer, but,
no, but this is fascinating. This is what.
But I'm condensing it down somewhat because this is over like 15 years. So the Russo brothers had it. They had me come out to LA for a few days, and Joe Russo wrote the script, the first script. And so at each stage, I was very, very thrilled, but also had very low expectations. I always thought it was not going to happen up until the point that they announced that Gosling, they told me that Gosling was interested and they were, very close to a deal, yada, yada. But I had heard that with probably 4 other actors over like a 10, 12-year period. So it didn't get my heart rate up at all. In fact, I remember when they announced that Gosling was going to do it, I remember going like, wait, didn't they tell me that he was interested? And I had to go back and look in some emails. It was like 6 months before we were talking about something else, and then they just said that as an aside. So the short answer is I was very excited, but with low expectations at that point.
But the result is pretty impressive.
Yeah, eventually, yeah.
Did you know what kind of budget they were looking at?
That's another interesting thing. I had one of my early conversations with the screenwriter, the first screenwriter, who ended up not being involved at all because he was made the deal with New Regency. His name's Adam Kozad. He's done some great stuff. A brilliant guy. He had written an original screenplay, and they came back to him and said, we want to beef this up to $70 million or something like that. So he told me, he's like, I've got to do another run on the screenplay and add like $25 million. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. As an author of books, I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing.
Get my head around that.
You can just, make it a little more expensive in the writing. And so I was fascinated by that.
Do you think in terms of how expensive things are going to be when you put them in the book?
I still don't, because I know that Hollywood's going to do whatever Hollywood's going to do. I've written something else that's been optioned, and I think they're developing it for TV, not a Gray Man story, a different series. And it takes place in Mexico, but they might change it to Indonesia or whatever. And the Gray Man novel, all the scenes that take place in Paris in the novel mostly take place in the Czech Republic in the film, so that's still a pretty nice place to shoot. And
not too shabby.
Yeah. But when I was writing it, I wasn't thinking about it. I really don't give that any consideration. If one of my books, carpet bombs Times Square or whatever, I don't think that, how much that would cost to shoot.
Right. Now, does location ever inspire your writing? Do you go places and go, oh, I've got to write this into a novel?
Absolutely, yeah. I do location research on almost every book. The only exceptions, and so Midnight Black is my 26th published novel, and I've done location research for every single book except one. I was planning on going to Asia. It was a book called Gunmetal Gray, a Gray Man book, and I had to have ankle surgery, so I wrote that book from my couch. And
doing a lot of online research.
Totally, yeah, which I do anyhow because you can't go to all the places. But and then a couple books during COVID, I wasn't able to go anywhere. But I always like to go to these different locations, sometimes with the very specific things in mind I want to look at. I wrote a book called Burner, where I had to go get on this one particular train between Milan and Geneva, and because I'd written so much, and I was like, I just can't see it, and I have to go there and do it. And
just go back and forth.
Yeah, and but then there's other ones where it's like, I just need to go over here and then hope to get some ideas or some inspiration. So it's definitely a combination. I've had things happen on research trips. I'm like, well, that was worth the whole trip right there. That one little dumb thing that just happened, I never would have thought of that, but it's given me so many other ideas. I'm going to go to Northern Ireland in a couple months and do some research, and back to the Caribbean to do some research on another book, both this year. And I have a couple of specific things that I want, but more than anything, I just kind of want to go there and get some inspiration or whatever it is that makes that worthwhile. But when I'm writing the story later or I'm editing the story, a lot of times I'll write the draft before I do the research, just because that's when I can get out of town for a week.
Do you take a lot of pictures?
I take a lot of pictures, I take a lot of video, I write stuff down at the time, I make audio notes at the time. For Midnight Black, you can't go to Russia now if you're an American. You can go, but you'll be traded back for a spy. And
You'll spend a lot of time.
Yeah, you'll spend some time there. But I did go to Russia and spent weeks there right before the war, or recently, shortly before the war. So I still remember a lot of stuff, but I also have videos and notes and pictures and things like that go into this book.
Wow. We covered a little bit of ground with that question, but that's wonderful stuff. So how involved were you in the adaptation of Gray Man? Did the second writer work with you on that, or did he just take the book and run with it?
Before Joe Russo started writing the screenplay, I went out to LA and spent a couple days with him and his brother Anthony. They're both the directors. Joe wrote the screenplay. And so I spent a lot of time with them. And honestly, the majority of what we were talking about was where the series goes, because they were thinking about it as a franchise from the beginning and like where it might go. And they wanted to understand some stuff later in the series and where I planned on taking the story. So we talked about a lot of that. But then I remember just sitting there and I think for a couple of days we had an office at Sony, but the other times we were just like sitting in coffee shops and bars and talking. And I remember like showing them some video of something or talking about some film that I saw that was like very inspirational to me as I was writing it. And so it was that level of it. But
so they can get kind of in your head a little bit.
Yeah. And the finished product had other writers that were on it. And after I left that, I think it took Joe about a year to write the script. He was directing Marvel films at the time, so he was busy. And I remember him calling me and he's like, "Yeah, I want to see what you think." So he sent it to me and I loved it. We talked about it. I think there were.
Make any suggestions?
I really don't remember. It wasn't anything big. I understand how the process works, and I very much understand how creative people work and how they are, and so there's things that like, well, I would do that differently, but you're the creator of this piece, just as if you wrote something and I gave you my take on it, there would be things that were different. So I understand all facets of that. I have been going to book signings or events ever since the movie came out, and there'll be so many people that'll raise their hand to ask a question. And it's like, well, in the movie he did this, but in the book they did this. And I'm like,
get over it.
I wrote the book and I saw the movie. It's like, I don't know what to tell you.
They're different works of art.
Yeah, they're different works of art. And what I've always said, and I really think it's true, it's not the directors, it's not the film side's job to be simply engineers, to take that sheet of paper with words typed on it and convert that into visual and audio and everything like that. That's not their job. It's their job to interpret the story, to take the story, take what they like out of it, come up with their own stuff. So, you have creative people at all facets of that. And when I saw the film, there were things that Ryan Gosling did that I thought were so good and I'm like, I don't think he read book 11, but this is like something out of book 11. It's like
you never know, because actors so involved themselves, they might have.
Well, it was very clear that he knew a lot more of the story and a lot more of the character's personality that I revealed in the first book. He's kind of a shut-off character, and you get a little of that in the first book, but there were some nuances of him that I was so like just taken by. I'm like, how does he know about that? It's like nobody told me that that they read book 6, and because that's when that came out. But at every spot their creative people involved.
Right.
And you know, even in point of view, I'm writing a scene from a certain point of view, and they could change the point of view in the filming, and it very much changes how I saw it, how I felt about it, what I was trying to get across. But they're looking for something different, or they're pulling out something different from the story. So it was interesting. I mean, to see your work done. I had a book turned into or actually wrote an original audio play, and that was the first time it came out before the movie, and that was the first time I'd heard actors like interpret words that I'd written, and it's a very fascinating experience because it's not exactly how you imagined it, but it works together on its own. Yeah. You get to enjoy it a little bit.
And they get to inform it with their own personalities.
Exactly. Yeah.
So did you get to attend any of the filming?
I didn't. So it was right in the middle of COVID, so it was a bad time. You know.
Oh, what a tough time to make a movie.
Yeah, it was a tough time, and I had been telling people this was never going to happen. This was never going to happen. And so once they announced and they said, "Here's our shooting date and everything," I was telling my wife, who I didn't know her, you know, the first 8 or 9 years that this process has been going on. I'm like, it's not going to happen. Something's going to shut this whole thing down. Yeah,
I've been through this.
Yeah. And I'd even had my film agent say he was on set, first day on set for a project that some funding didn't come through at the last second. Lights were up and everything, and it all went away. And so, you know, they like to throw cold water on you, so you don't run around too excited. And so I was like, something's going to get in the way. And then it came out that they were postponing filming Gray Man for like 6 weeks because of a COVID outbreak in London or wherever they were filming, or maybe it was California. And I remember going like, "This is what I told you. Remember? Yep. Remember I told you?" I was like, "They're not going to start shooting again in 6 weeks." So then they did, and then I started seeing, you know, literally just seeing on Twitter, you know, locations and them filming and him doing things that I had, you know, written in a book in 2007, and here we were in 2021, and it's happening.
You know, there's a word for that. They call it development hell.
Yeah.
When you like option something and then it goes on and on and on before it finally starts to go into production.
Yeah.
And it's that whole long range where anything can happen, everything can fall apart.
Yeah.
And you've kind of experienced that.
Yeah, it bounced around for a while. At one point, Sony signed Charlize Theron to play the Gray Man, and they rewrote the entire script. Her name was still Court Gentry, which is the character's name.
But not revealed in the first one, right?
In the movie, yeah. At the very beginning, they say his name once, and then after that, they call
in the cell.
Yeah. And after that, they call him Six, which is so. You know, when you write first off, when you know a lot of stuff about how these things work, you know that everybody's got 26 names, and you can't really do that in a story. But I mean, his real name is Cortland Gentry. His call sign with a particular CIA task force was Sierra 6, so some people call him Six who know him from that. His legend of him is Gray Man. His code name for CIA, which is not his call sign, was Violator. And so there's all these different things, and they went with Six.
And Court's a good, you know, gender neutral name, I guess.
Yeah. And people say, "Well, how did you come up with that name?" And I was like, "God, I wish I remember that." Or maybe I should just make up a story. But I sort of don't. You know, you spend a lot of time playing around with different names and how they sound. And that was something I came up with probably in 2005, because I'd written an entire other book that had the Gray Man in it called Goon Squad that never got published. And that was the book before Gray Man. And
so how he ended up in prison.
Yeah. Yes.
So were the scenes with his father drawn from that book?
No.
Okay.
That was created by the writers.
And then so Charlize Theron, what was her arc? How long was she attached?
I mean, it was maybe a couple years and they sent me the script. And I was like, you know, sounds like a really good movie. I'd love to go see it. But if it had a different name and characters had different names, I would not recognize it. It was a completely different plot. It was about a woman whose husband was a SEAL and was killed, I think in Colombia or something. And she's like working as a bounty hunter. And I barely remember it. But it couldn't have been, there was not a single area that was the same or single action scene. And I was like, does the name of that book have so much juice that they're going to take it in Hollywood? And I really don't think it does. So I never really understood the whole idea of that. But that fell by the wayside, and I think it would have made a good movie.
We've got a huge following. I mean, how many of your Gray Man series have been on the bestseller list?
let's see, there's 14 of the Gray Man books. Books 2, 3, 4, and 5 did not hit the bestseller list. So whatever that is, 9 or 10.
Wow.
1 Minute Out hit #1. All the others, I mean, in the last 8 or 9 years, they've all been in the top 5. So
That's amazing.
It's gone really well. Yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Congratulations.
It's
Yeah.
so much harder. I mean, thanks. Yeah, you guys are film guys. So you don't have to worry about this, but it's so much harder to hit the Times list now because of TikTok and certain genres that are very, very popular on TikTok and these books. There's, you look at the top 15 on the hardcover list, and 8 of them are the same 3 names, and it's like that week after week after week. So it's tougher to break on there than I hit #1 like 5 years ago, and I probably won't again because I'm not, in a genre where it's very popular.
Hard to say.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
It could happen.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, did you see anything in the movie that rubbed you the wrong way? Was there anything that just you went, he wouldn't do that?
Yes, and it's all this really pedantic stuff that I can't really, I mean, I will say, but I can't really say without looking like, so when you know a lot about the inner workings of government, now obviously Gray Man is fantasy, but I try and sell it as accurately as possible before it goes off into, over the top and tearing the envelope. So there's a lot of things. I mean, watching the film the first time somebody refers to a CIA officer as an agent, I mean, that is nails on a chalkboard to me. That's absolute nails on a chalkboard, because an agent is someone who works on behalf of the organization. It's not an employee of the organization. So a CIA agent might be a Russian who is giving secrets to the CIA case officer or paramilitary officer. It's all very, very different. And so
there's,
throughout, and they get
a lexicon for that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's fine because everybody knows what you mean, and I get all that. There's a scene there's a scene in the film where a fight scene, and there's a dead Czech police officer, and Court is handcuffed. And this is all out of the book, but this is where it changes. He pulls the dead police officer and then takes the frag grenade on the guy's belt off and then blows up the bad guys. And I'm pretty sure there's not a single police officer or police unit anywhere in the world that has fragmentation grenades on their belts. I'm like,
Just
wow.
the really tough ones.
Yeah, and then there's lots of things that you completely understand the film shorthand, but as an author, I'm like, you couldn't get away with it. He's being chased by these guys, and suddenly he's in a big vehicle, and then suddenly they have, rocket-propelled grenade launchers. I'm like, why did they bring those to shoot a guy who's handcuffed on a bench? It's like, what were they thinking?
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case. So that escalatory stuff, I mean, that looks great. But as the writer, you just kind of go like, okay, well, that's...
Roll your eyes.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen. But I will say that, like, so much of it, there were lots of great ideas that they got. The character Lloyd, who is one of the villains, in the book there's 2 villains. There's Lloyd and the German guy, Riegel. It's been a while, sorry. A guy named Kurt Riegel, and they sort of play off of each other. And Lloyd is kind of the lawyer, the actual, kind of crazy guy, but not a big physical presence. But they got Chris Evans in their film. So of course they're going to beef that role up. Exactly. And of course they're going to make him the villain alone and do this sort of back and forth. And I thought that was terrific. I liked this character, Denny Carmichael. My Denny Carmichael was written kind of out of central castings, former Vietnam era guy, just this craggy, old, grumpy, and they have this very like good-looking young guy who wouldn't be the deputy director of operations in real life at age 32. That would make me ask a lot of questions. But he was so great in the film, So they did a bunch that I liked, and there were just little things where you just go like, yeah, okay, we'll just pretend like that didn't happen. Of course, I get emails. It's my fault.
Right. Exactly. You always get the blame.
Yeah, fans of the book who go like, well, why did they do this?
Why'd you let them do that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So did you manage to make it to set?
I never made it to set.
Okay.
It was COVID protocols. I went to the premiere, so I got to meet a lot of the people, but I never actually got to be on set. And they said next time.
Disappointing?
It would be something to be cool to see for a day, but I would be very, very aware that, the last person that the director wants around is the other guy who thinks he owns it, And even though I don't have that mentality at all.
Yeah. But some writers do.
Yeah, some writers do. And I wouldn't have gone in there thinking that, anything was going to change,
Right.
bend to my will. It's just a different process. But I would like to, see it in person. I'm set up as an executive producer on something else that is in development anyway. And if that comes to pass, then obviously I'll probably have more of a hand in it. But it was a time. What always happens with me is I'm always really busy and I'm always really, really far behind. I'm always desperate to, I got up at 6 something this morning and spent 3.5 hours working.
It's already been working.
And I have to go back to work after this. And even, I told myself the day that film comes out, I'm sure I'm going to be working in the lobby of the hotel, and I was till like 3:30, and I had to be at the premiere at 5. So, I'm always when the movie was coming out, people were like, "Oh, you should go to Czech Republic and this and this and this," and I'm like, I've got 1,250 words to write every single day between now and when that book comes out, and that has never changed. So I'm always very focused on, even when I go on a book tour, you always think that that's like a victory lap for the author because he gets to hold the book in his hand. But I'm like so far behind on the next thing and I have no idea what it's going to be.
I can't spare the time.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always this anvil over your head.
With that in mind, how much time can you devote to book tours?
Whatever they ask me to do, I do. So
Is that contractual? Is that part of your deal?
It's not contractual, and they always ask me. No one's ever said you have to be here at this day. And I was on Joe Rogan's show, and they're like, "Hey, would you like to do Joe Rogan? He wants you on." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." That's 5 million eyeballs or whatever that is. It's I guess you multiply eyeballs by 2, so maybe it's 10 million eyeballs. I would have gotten an email if I put that in a book.
Right.
So I like to do it when I'm actually doing it. But I do have to sit there and go like, okay, that's 4 planes. It's just an example of the writer's life. It's like I've gone to book signings and just had great turnouts, and I've gone to book signings and nobody's shown up.
That's frustrating.
5 days before I was on, at the LA premiere where they had like the Gray Man and 3-story letters everywhere and every billboard up and down Sunset was Gray Man. I was at a book signing in Chicago where 5 people came.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, it's probably gonna look different 5 days from now. And it's just how it is. But I think, wow, I got on 4 planes and stayed in a hotel. And you can get a little bit of work done, but you always think you're gonna get more done. But I have 2 books to do this year, so there's no real days off. Yeah.
And your books are not short books.
No,
They're major novels.
Yeah, they're big books, and that's a self-inflicted wound. No one's ever asked me to do that. And I think when I started writing with Tom Clancy, I just liked making stories kind of bigger and deeper. And so this Midnight Black's 170,000 words. I tried to write a screenplay once, and I remember telling Joe Russo, I'm like, I'm working on a screenplay, but I'm on page 185. I'm about a third of the way through the story. And I'm like, so I'm pretty sure that's not a screenplay.
Yeah, it's a different animal.
Yeah, it's such a different animal. And it's hard to go from one to the other, probably in either regard. But the only thing I care about are stories. Like I don't have to write long form fiction. If I could write a short story or a screenplay or whatever, I would love that just as much and be just as proud of it because you're using different muscles.
Do you ever do that? Do you ever write shorts?
I don't. I'm asked to write them for a lot, but it's like people are like, we just need 5,000 to 10,000 words. I'm like, who else needs 5,000 to 10,000 words? My book.
Yeah.
And the book.
And that's what pays the bills.
Yeah, and I would like to do it, and I would like to write nonfiction. I would like to try screenwriting again. There's all sorts of things I'd like to do, and hopefully will when I slow the pace down a little bit. But at least not this year.
Is there a plan for that?
Yeah,
slowing the pace?
Yes, I mean I'm coming to.
Your wife would probably like that.
Yeah, she would. I'm coming to terms with the fact there's probably more books behind me than ahead of me, and I don't need to write 2 books a year. This year is different. I sort of had to, so I would like to dial it back a little bit. When your book comes out and people read it, they're like, you need to write faster, and I'm like, I'm not painting a fence. You could probably paint a fence faster if you worked hard. It's literally, it's tougher the more you do because you're trying to come up with something new and told in a new and different way. So there's, my ambition isn't to put out more books than anybody else or to sell more books than anybody else. I just, I agree to things that are good ideas, but I always would like to have more time for them. And so I think, the later stages of my career is going to be me really enjoying taking more time on them.
And you can ask for that, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. No, nobody's making me do anything. They're obviously encouraging me to stay on this one book a year schedule for the Gray Man, and that's good for my career, and it keeps you kind of moving up, and it's what fans expect. But I also want to write other things. So certain years you kind of have to, do double duty.
And this is one of those years.
This is one of those years, yeah. Yeah. Last year was not, although it took me, I was so late with this book. This book just took me a long time. So.
You want to tell them that story? Because I found that interesting.
About
getting behind.
Oh, yeah. So, Midnight Black, last year's book. I got a late start on it because I was finishing a book called Sentinel, which came out last July, and it was due the year before. So it's always, you get a little bit later and a little bit later. It's like everything else. And so I got a late start on Midnight Black, and it wasn't until after my book tour and a family vacation and things and then I was like, all right, I'm going to totally jump into Midnight Black. And I had a lot of writer's block. And, writer's block is just not knowing what you're doing. It's like, it's just a term for, it's not procrastination. It's nothing else than not having it figured out. And I was stuck and I was just writing very, very slowly. And I would reach out to my editor and I'm like, I'm putting the hours in that I always put in. It's just that. But
the words aren't hitting.
Yeah,
the page.
it's just not generating what I used to generate, and hopefully it's just this one-off. I'm really proud with the book, and the early reviews have been fantastic. And so I'm at the end of the day, all last summer I was going like, this is never going to happen. There is a point with every one of my books where I would give the advance back and just forget the whole thing. There really is, because
to just purge your
mind of it. Just like, I can't do this. Nobody understands. I can't do this. And then the book comes in and it's fine, and everybody just laughs and goes, "You say that every year." And I'm like, "It's true every year, and someday it's going to be true where you're going to see it." But as it is now, it's like internalized truth. Yeah. But it takes as long as it takes, and my publisher is fantastic, and they were like, if we need to push this book 6 months or a year, we can do that. But
they have press runs scheduled and all that stuff, right?
And yes, and this one came out so late, it actually was a pain for a lot of other people. I mean, it was a pain for me to write.
Right.
But I am literally just one person in the whole system of getting these books out. So. I was very aware that I made things tough on other people, so that's why I'm working so hard now and trying to stay ahead of it. I'm not starting this book in April like I did the last one.
Right. How much of your self-discipline comes from writing with Tom Clancy?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, for the first Clancy book, I said, when is this due? And I remember they said July, and this was, I think, March or something, and I was like, July of this year? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, are you serious?
Who does that?
Yeah. So my involvement in that book was 90-something days, and I was like in DC immediately. And for the first Clancy book, I wasn't allowed to say I was working with Clancy because they didn't know how the book was going to turn out.
Or the collaboration.
Yeah, how the collaboration was going to turn out. So I wasn't able to use that as a calling card. So I'm at the Pentagon saying, I'm this paperback writer you probably never heard of, and I was just going like, I bet that door would open right up if I said I'm working with Tom Clancy. So that was a tough year. It was all top secret. And then I was somewhere having dinner with my agent, and there was another guy there, and he's like, "What are you working on?" I'm like, "Well, actually, I can't say." And my agent's like, "Yeah, he's writing Clancy's book." And I was like, "Well, how come I don't get to do it?"
Because he trusted him.
He was a lot more flip about it than I was. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So it was a very compressed timeline. They're really, really big books. I mean, the beauty of them is, I look back and I did 7 Clancy books in 6 years with him, and then after he passed away, the entire books. And I look back on that and I go like, I don't remember ever having an idea that didn't end up in a book in some way, shape, or form. Whereas now I will write chapters and just totally shuck them and just go like, no, that didn't work. I thought I had something there, but I don't. But at that stage in my career, and I think it was the pressure and the timeline, but it was also you're fresher and you haven't come up because, you know, early in my career, I'm like, oh, I always thought about this, or maybe I could do something off this, and those are gone. You have to come out and get fresh information, you know, just to stay creative. So early, I think that discipline did come a lot from the Clancy books, because I was also trying to write my own books at the same time. So I was doing 2 books a year, and the Clancy books, 200,000 word, 700-page novels.
It's crazy. How did you collaborate? What was the process?
So it all started, we had the same publisher, and that was just luck. You know, there's just incredible good fortune that when my agent sent my book out to New York to 10 different publishers, 9 of them said no. And the last one, the guy who said yes, was Tom Clancy's publisher, although he published Tom Clancy's big hardback books and he was going to publish my little paperback book. But that got me in the door. And then 2.5 years into my career with him, I always say to this day, I think I got the gig with Clancy because he would always say, wow, you answer the phone every time I call, my editor. He's like, yeah, you're so good about getting back. You know, it's like I considered it a job. You know, I didn't consider myself this artsy, fartsy guy that was like on his own schedule. You know, I was like, oh, my editor's calling. And I think just sort of like being easy to work with probably helped. He knew that I loved Tom Clancy. And they asked me, you know, if I would be interested in collaborating. And I wrote something like it was in a Tom Clancy book, just to show them that I knew who the characters were and all that. It was just a sample, and then 25 or 50 pages, and never did anything with it. I don't even know if I still have it somewhere. But I sent that to them, and then they had me go, and they liked it, and they had me go to Baltimore to meet him. And then so the collaboration was, you know, it wasn't 2 guys at a partner's desk or, you know, traveling together or anything like that. It was via email and via our editor and other people. Clancy had a big group of people that worked with him where I had nothing. You know. So, you know, that's how it worked. And then when he passed away, we'd just turned in the 3rd book. It was called Command Authority, and we had just turned it in. And I had seen him in person probably 10 months before. And he had told me about some health issues, but was very confident, in, you know, in how things were going to be. And no communication after that did he sound, you know, did he ever tell me anything? So I knew nothing about it. So it was tough. And I thought it would take, I was like, this is a guy with who's married, had an ex-wife, had 5 grown children. I was like, it's going to take that estate years to figure out what they want to do with the series. But within a couple weeks, they're like, we want to publish 2 books next year, and we'd like you to write both of them. So I didn't, at that stage, early in my career, when I first started working with Clancy, I was very unsure. I was very like, well, you know, why am I here? But I'm just trying to make people believe that I deserve to be here. Imposter syndrome. But by the time they asked me to do that, I was like, if you'd asked anybody else, I'd have been upset because I felt like I'd done a good job.
Well, you had earned it.
Yeah, I felt like I had,
Yeah, and you had a tone. You know, you developed that tone with Clancy, and you know, you could maintain it.
Right.
It's turned into a franchise. How many writers have written Tom Clancy books at this point?
1, 2, 3, probably 6 or 7. And I think I know of 8. I know of the 8th, but it hasn't been announced yet. Yeah.
And they can't all be true to that tone.
No, and I think that's an important thing. And it's something I kind of figured out on my own, but I'm sorry if I'm hitting my microphone. But my editor feels exactly the same way I do. It's like when they brought me in, I said, I'm not going to write like I'm Tom Clancy. That would be a disservice to his fans. It would be insulting to him. It wouldn't be exactly me. I'm going to use these characters in a big geopolitical thriller a la Tom Clancy of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And I'm going to like do my take on it. And I remember thinking, I remember kind of poo-pooing the fact that there were still James Bond books coming out, you know, after Ian Fleming died or whatever. But it's really changed. When I went on my first book tour after Tom died, I was sure that I'm coming out with a Jack Ryan novel with Tom Clancy's name on it and my name on it. I was like, I'm going to go to these book signings and people are going to just eat me alive, just be throwing tomatoes at me and all that. And it was exact opposite. I would have these like old guys with the USS Dallas hat on come wait in line, and they'd be like, thank you so much for keeping these characters going. And I realized it's like, if the author is good, and people love these are beloved characters. They want to see what they would do about what's happening in Syria or what's happening in Russia or what's happening in North Korea or what's happening domestically. It's all if the writer's good. And if every one of us who have written after Clancy tried to sound just like Clancy, and I think it would be a disaster and it would have turned to crap a long time ago. But I think you get Mark Greaney's take on a Jack Ryan novel, Don Bentley, Mark Cameron, who's the guy who followed me. They're all great writers. Bentley and Cameron are very different writers, but they both understand how to write that type of a novel. Andrews and Wilson done it. There's M.J. Woodard. There's a lot of people that have been given that chance to sort of play in that sandbox. Early on, I wrote something into one of my Clancy books that I was like, there's no way they're going to let me keep that. There's no way, because it was pretty dramatic with something that happens to one of the characters. And the editor's like, yeah, no, you can't do that. I was like, I get it. I was just looking for my boundaries, and I found my boundary. But no, I think it's good. If the writing is good, then the writing is good.
I think that's really true.
Yeah.
Well, would you ever write another Tom Clancy novel?
People asked me that a lot the first couple of years after I stopped, and what had happened was I had written 6 in back to back, and I'd written some Gray Man as well. And my editor asked me if I wanted to do a 7th, and I was like, I feel like I've said everything I can say in this world, without like a long break, and I don't think I can keep it fresh. And he said we were at lunch in New Orleans down at a conference, and he's like, okay, I get it. He's like, if you were going to write one, like, what would it be about? And I was like, well, I had this idea that how the Office of Personnel Management got hacked by the Chinese. I thought, like, well, what if that was weaponized but not by the Chinese? And so I started like talking about this, and then it was like, the interesting thing about that is, and then I just stopped and go like, I see what you just did there. Right? And so I wrote that book, and that's like the highest reviewed of my Clancy book. It was called True Faith and Allegiance.
Wow.
And then at year 7, he's like, well, what do you think about next year's book? And I'm like, I really don't have another one in me. He's like, well, I can go back and see if there's more money. I was like, this is not negotiation. At this point, this is just, you have squeezed all the juice out of this piece of fruit, at least for now. And I knew that when I stepped off that train would keep moving. Like, I knew that, and I can't say that they wouldn't let me write another one if I asked to right now, but
if you had an idea that popped into your head that was perfect for
Clancy, then I'd probably want to. I would probably make some calls. But it's all, and this is for anyone here that's writing in the film world as well. Intellectual property is so important. It's so important, and I could talk about that for days. And it's like, it's one thing to go write an original screenplay and sell that screenplay, and that's awesome. That gets your name out there, and that gets you other types of work. And but it's a whole nother thing to write that original screenplay and then go have it copyrighted as a graphic novel or some other little thing, and like then you own.
Yeah, or like you said on Rogan, somebody's taking one of your characters from Gray Man and doing a spinoff. How does that work?
I mean, it's I get paid just as if it was another Gray Man novel. I haven't heard.
But you have no creative control.
No, but I have no creative control of really the Gray Man movie. I had no creative control.
Sure.
Just them being nice guys and interested in my take. That was the extent of my control. But there was nothing contractually that said, I get to say that there's no grenades on the belts of the cops in Prague, because I probably would have executed that that part of my contract. But they were just good guys who were interested in had conversations. But
And what character was that? Because you never mentioned it on the podcast.
I do not know.
You still don't know?
To this day, I do not know. And I don't know how developed it is. I know it was beyond an idea they had, something they were working on, and they had screenwriters for it, but I'm not sure. There is supposed to be a second Gray Man film, but I don't know when they're going to start shooting that either.
And you said that's going to be a compilation of several of the novels.
Did I say that?
I think so, on Joe Rogan. It was a 3-hour podcast. Just saying.
Yeah.
So,
I don't get nervous to like speak publicly or speak in front of millions of people at all. But when they're like, the Rogan's going to be 3 hours, I'm like, there's no way I'm not going to say something in 3 hours that I'm not supposed to, especially when he's trying to get me to take pills and things. Yeah, it was surreal. The whole time I was like, stay on guard, stay on guard. And then within like 20 minutes, I'm just talking to a guy and I'm like, oh crap.
He's very disarming. Isn't
He's incredibly disarming. He has no notes. There's no preamble. Like I met him, got some coffee, and we walked back and we sat down. And I'm putting my headphones on. He's like, "Mark, it's great to see you." And I'm like, "Oh, is this happening?" There was like no setup. And then for 3 hours he talks. And I literally at one point looked over my shoulder to see if there was like a teleprompter telling him what to ask, but it was just him talking. But yes, so my understanding is, really, for the first movie, there's things in the first movie that have nothing to do with the first book because they were trying to establish it as a franchise. So Denny Carmichael, who's one of the bad guys, is in the movie. He's not in the first book. He comes around in book 2. Bigger in book 5. Suzanne Brewer, who's in the movie, she comes around in book 5. So they take lots of things.
Yeah, they're establishing. Come back to.
Yeah, I wasn't writing my first book as a franchise. I was trying to be a published author. I literally wanted to hold a book in my hand. If they gave me $1 for it, I'd have been thrilled. I mean, I truly wanted to hold a book in my hand with some art on it and my name on it, and that's still exciting to me. 26 books in to get that first copy of a book that you worked on. Yeah, it's still a huge rush, and hopefully it always will be. Yeah.
So at this point, you haven't seen a potential screenplay or.
Of the second one? No, I've talked to the screenwriter who is doing it.
No, it's not the brothers again doing it?
Well, yeah, so they're involved, but I think the first pass was written by Scott McFeely, who is one of the other screenwriters who have written with the Marvel movies and with the Russos in the past. So I have talked to him, and
is he one of those $1 million screenwriters?
I'm sure he is. Yeah, I'm sure he is. Yeah, no, I think he's doing all right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's see how we're doing on time. 11:57. Okay. So let's open it up to questions then.
Have you ever written a book that you felt like you channeled, that it just came? And if so, why do you think it happened?
I wouldn't say that about a book, but definitely you have these days or series of days, and it's wonderful when that happens because that's what you're always chasing. When you go and open up your laptop at Starbucks at 6:45 in the morning and just stare at what you wrote yesterday and nothing's coming, or you'll write something and go like, I'm just not feeling it or I'm not seeing it. You go, oh, I just want that. I just want to click into that. And so on every book, I have those moments. And I don't mean moments. I mean, it could be a whole scene. It could be like a whole aspect to the plot line. And the thing that triggers it is always some weird remote thing. On a book recently, I got an idea to change the point of view. I was really, really stuck. And I was like, what if I tell it from this point of view? And immediately ideas came, and immediately like you just get this rush of adrenaline and you're like, oh, I've got to get that down so fast. And that's why I say that procrastination or writer's block is literally just not having a direction. Because, if any one of us had this idea that we felt so certain about right this second, we would go write it right now. Nobody in here is lazy. You all want to do this, and you would get that down, and you get it down as fast as you can. So a lot of times action scenes come very sort of natural to me, and so people compliment my action scenes and say that they're very grounded and people can understand what's going on, but they're also very kinetic and big. And I think I just see them that way. But for me, those greatest moments come in dialogue scenes. Like dialogue to me is the most important part of writing, because you will figure your story out by listening to your characters talk to each other and just being free. It's so important when you're writing to just get your first thought. Your first thought is your best thought, and maybe it's not, but think that it is, at least while you get it down, and then go back and edit it, very sort of skeptically. But when you're putting it down, just let it flow and go with it. And if something seems a little bit too big or a little bit too weird, that's okay, because maybe you'll tone it down later, maybe you won't. But if you're in that zone of that flow, I've never had a book where the whole book just wrote itself. Yeah, oh, that would be so great. I'll let you know if I do. But 26 in, that's never happened. But there are books that are easier to write than others. This book, Midnight Black, I thought I was, if you can say what the story is in 2 sentences, that's very helpful. That's very, very helpful. And I could say what this story is in 2 sentences, but I think I was under a lot of time pressure at first, and then I ended up taking the time that I needed to where I was not getting the words down. I'm like, okay, this does not seem like a more complex story for me. I'm not sure why I'm having problems, but it was just like making a decision on where I wanted this character to be mentally or emotionally, and little pieces of the puzzle, the jigsaw pieces weren't coming together type of thing. But once they did, I probably wrote that last half of that book in 1/5 the time the first half of the book took. So
Thank you.
you're
Do your,
welcome.
do your characters ever say things you don't expect them to say?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a real thing, but you have to let that happen. Because I can say, having met a lot of people who are just so frozen, their creativity is so frozen because they want everything to be perfect and everything. I've met people, they're like, yeah, I'm wanting to be a writer, and I've got this stuff graphed out and all these character sketches and all this other stuff, and I'm like, man, you just need to write. You just need to write words, and you'll be better a week from now than you are now, and much better a month from now. But people, if your brain says you have to have all your ducks in a row before you start doing it, then you're in trouble. I think you have to. Creativity really sort of flows from just letting it go and just listening to the characters talk to each other and building from that.
Sure. Do you wake up at night sometimes with entire scenes that you have to jot down?
Yes. Sometimes they're terrible later. At the time, they seem great.
What was I thinking?
Yeah. No, I definitely will just get some random idea. My wife is just so used to me going like, hang on a second. No, I'll just write something down that she'll ask me what it is, and I'll read it to her, and it means nothing, but it means something in the scheme of the book. Not really entire scenes, but big chunks.
I got a 2-part question. First, am I going to need any backstory? This is, a long list of books prior
Only
to
15
this
books
one.
before that.
I mean, I'm used to reading one of your, I won't say competitors, but I need to know if I need any back history.
Yeah.
With
So
some
all
of the
my books are
characters.
standalone. Everything I've ever written is a
Okay.
standalone novel. It's just because me as a reader, it's just, we've all picked up books where you're going like, I just need some kind of a map on what's going on here. And so I establish really quickly who people are, what their relationships are. I always allude to things that have happened in the past without making that, a integral part of the story.
Because I don't want to feel lost.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you mentioned something,
Yeah.
that was in 3 books ago.
Yeah, so this book starts off with a woman in a Russian prison, used to be called gulags. It was built during the Gulag years, and a guy who's desperately trying to get them out. You learn very quickly who she is, why she's there, but it doesn't go into everything that happened in Cuba that got her kidnapped in the first place. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's not important to the story. So it's just basically a story about a former spy trying to rescue his former spy, Russian. Love out of a gulag, but there's 80 other parts to the story, and they're all in that book. They're not in other books.
The second part is, you said you wrote 26 Gray Man novels. Are you afraid of your plots becoming too formulaic? Like, this is the same plot, similar to book 5 that I'm now writing?
Yeah, and that's always a danger. So there's 14 Gray Man. I'm working on the 15, and there's 7 Clancy's. There's 2 in my Armored series. There's Red Metal, and there's a couple that I was ghostwriter of. All since 2009. And so, but I do think all the time, like, does this feel like something else? And sometimes I realize what I'm worried about, no one's ever going to think. Because I'm like, this is kind of like that book the ghost writing book that I did, where this and this happens, and they were related. And I'm like, I can't do it. And so I'll throw it out. I like to make every book different. I did one of the Gray Man books in first person. And it's the only one that hit #1 on the Times list. But at the same time, it's also like 2% of people hated it, who are the Gray Man fans, because it was different and they didn't like it. So, you know, you learn from these things, but it was an exercise and it felt good in the story. So I want everything to be different and feel different. You definitely, obviously, run the risk of writing. You know, I joked with the Clancy books were so big. 7 books in, I was like, I'm going to get to the point where I'm on the second time. I have 2 guys knife fighting in a hot tub. You know, it's like at that point you're like, there's a problem.
Wait a minute, been here before.
Yeah, been here before. So yeah, hopefully I will stop writing books before I'm just, you know, regurgitating something I've written.
Thanks. That was good.
I read that you have a political science degree. How did that help with your writing for your books?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say for the longest time, I walked around and said I did nothing with my poli sci. So I was in political science and international relations, and then I worked in restaurants, and then I worked in international sales and marketing, but I wanted to be a writer. And so really how it helped me was it was what I was interested in. You know, anybody who says write what you know, it's like that's just a lazy thing to tell people. It's, you know, sort of write what you're interested in, because, you know, right now I don't know the inner workings of the Irish Republican Army, but I'm learning for a book that I'm writing now. So it's just my poli-sci stuff was just what I was interested in. When I was young, I had like a subscription to The Economist and U.S. News and Time and
Typical kid.
yeah, it was a weird kid, but and then I went into that in college because I was interested in that. I learned a million things more, and also with my poli-sci degree, I learned how to research. Although I'm so old that it was all microfilm, and you know that sort of thing. It's all different now.
He's way older than he looks.
Well, okay.
No. We can say that too.
So you know, for the longest time after I got out of college, I just became a reader. I just loved reading. And then I discovered Tom Clancy because it was fiction, it was exciting, it was fun, but it was also teaching you a lot about different aspects of the world. So I really do think what I do now is all about my college years, but for the longest time, I got published when I was 42. So from graduating college to when I first got published, you couldn't really say that other than the fact that I would read books and be interested in stuff like that. But you know, it was just my love.
What was the final impetus that made you take the leap of faith and write?
Well, I was 22. I was in college, and I got the idea. I was reading a lot of, you know, espionage novels, and I just I got an idea, and I remember thinking like, oh, I wish somebody'd write a book about this. And it was about terrorism in Lebanon, just some book some nonfiction book I read. I just kind of got like, well, what if this, you know, that would be a cool story. And I was like, well, I should just start trying to write it. And I spent 15 years writing my first book. And that book was started in 1990, finished in 2005. And then I shelved it and then wrote my second book in like 7.5 months. Because like once I did it, I was like, okay, you didn't work that hard for 15 years. It's not like you really worked on it 15 years. You were just lazy and you didn't really believe anything would ever, you know, come out of it. So you just kind of, you're a little bit just like lackadaisical about it. It's like, let's actually do some work and see what happens. Yeah. And it was my 4th book that got published. Yeah.
So now that you're more experienced in the industry and you're a little older and you've written more books, if you could, or maybe for future projects, would you keep more of your intellectual, what's the word I'm looking for? Would you keep more creative control?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when they ask you if you would like to option your product, in my case, my book, there was not a scenario where this unknown author was going to be able to go, yeah, but I want creative control, I want, you know, casting control and all this other stuff. It just doesn't happen. And to this day, you know, unless you're Stephen King or John Grisham or J.K. Rowling or whatever, it's hard to get a lot of creative control. And you hear horror stories about authors that make it hard for the rest of us, that they were, you know, difficult on set or difficult just with that development process. Having said that, I have another project that's being developed, and I am set up as an executive producer, and I really don't even know what that means yet because we haven't gotten that far in it.
We'll talk.
Yeah, they have a writer that's working on it, and then I've spoken with another writer that they had previously, and I'll probably talk to this guy. And so I think I think my input is going to be about the writing and not the casting or the sets or anything like that. So I think there's only so much you can really get. And as a writer, like this was always my end goal, was to write books. And it was frustrating when I first got published, and everybody's like, "Where's your movie? Where's your movie?" And I'm like, "This is kind of good too, right?" But everybody's interested in the movie. But my end goal was always to be able to tell stories in the way that I knew how to tell stories and I have control over. Like when I write a book, I'll talk to my editor when I start writing the book, and I don't talk to anybody else. I mean, the Hollywood thing with meetings and notes and you know, all that stuff. It's like that just seems like a lot of trouble.
Not your idea of
Yeah,
fun.
yeah. So I would probably, you know, I did have creative control in who I sold the project to. So there were other people that were interested in it that I thought that's probably not as good a fit, and that's where it came in. And would somebody have done it different than the Russos? Absolutely. Better, worse, who knows? But you know, I was happy with the end result. It wasn't my movie, but it was their movie. But I don't think that's something. I don't think that's a hill I would die on.